As we celebrate the launch of our flagship, we also celebrate another milestone. 100th launch since the first Balance 526 hit the water in 2015. But that date isn't really where Balance starts. The story begins more than 2 years earlier, with an idea that becomes a drawing, and a drawing that becomes the blueprint for everything we build today. I'm talking, of course, about our partnership with Naval architects Toit Yacht Design. And that's why today I have invited the GM of Toit Yacht Design, that's Sean from Rensburg. Sean, thank you for being here. The thing that's on everybody's mind right now is what we're sitting on. Tell me just a little bit more about what are we on and what's gone into this.
Thanks, Dean. Yeah, no, this is a truly special project for us. Toit Yacht Design have been involved with large catamarans in previous years. I think this would be our 13th or 14th large catamaran.
Okay.
And that's usually, we consider large catamarans over 60 foot, so, when Phil and the Balance team came to us to be part of one of their really big platform, like the 75, was definitely something that, we took on graciously. You can reflect on what the smaller balances are compared to the bigger 750. I'd relate them to the smaller ones as if they are your nice upmarket New York apartment, but you're sort of a little bit constrained to what you can do. Whereas with the 750, you have you've got the penthouse now. You've got the whole floor, and you've got freedom to look at not what can you do, but what can't you do. And I think what we try to do on this particular project, just more looking into the interior, is bring in elements of super yacht territory, into and what we know as a performance catamaran, and let these two worlds merge. And I think a key part of that was bringing in Design Unlimited, getting them on board, and with their super yacht experience, really get that super yacht feel, because I think it's definitely visible, and with a large platform could really embrace the super yacht look and feel.
Would you say that there's anything else out there that is like this?
I don't think so. I think it's a very unique market for such a vessel. I think you get the one spectrum where it's overly big, and there's quite a few luxuries, but you lose that performance element to it. And you get the other end of the spectrum where they try and work with elements of luxury, but it is a bit more of a performance orientated boat, or performance orientated boat. I think the coin word would be ultra performance. Where you need a full-on race crew to actually manage the boat, where we try and use a lot of technology in this on the 750 platform, and not to sophisticate the boat too much, but actually to simplify the way that you can sail the boat. And I think the key challenge was to actually look at what Balance is known for, and try and take those key elements and bring it into this bigger platform.
We really are redefining the philosophy of Balance again. It's that striking the balance between the two.
Correct.
And this really is the extreme point of both, because it is a hell of a performing boat. We can see that it just takes off, and it just it powers along. Tell me just a little bit more about the work that went into the rig, and just the power side of this boat.
As soon as you go over 60 foot, the loads just become exponentially bigger, and you need to actually really respect the loads, and you couldn't really handle a boat this size by traditional means, like your A-frame sheeting system and using winches. Now we're looking at integrating more hydraulic solutions into this. But what happens here is you're able to do a lot of adjustment just from the helm station. We're talking about working with the dagger boards, the traveler, the mainsheet system. Everything is now push button, and it's a lot safer on a platform this size. We're talking about loads of 9 tons on the mainsheet, and 6 tons on the clew load of the jib. When we first started off with the project, we had a very simple sail plan. But as soon as we got into it and we realized, where can we sort of gain some small performances here and there, we didn't really want to have a big Genoa that you'd have to handle with winches. We wanted to have the helmsman free of actually having to do much. It was just drive and push button. So you'd be
Okay.
able to trim the mainsail, trim the jib with huge efficiency, and not getting into any winching and so forth. The limitation that we have is where the mast is. So you've got a couple of options. We want to be able to get a bigger foresail area, okay? But there's two ways to do that. You could either bring the mast in, but now it compromises the salon a little bit. You've got a pole in the middle of nowhere, and it gets a little bit awkward on how you work with that. Or what you could do is push the forestay a little bit further forward, so your forward triangle becomes a whole lot bigger. There's noticeable performance. I mean, we've seen it on the 502s and the 580s.
Yeah.
We've done that same thing on the 750. But the critical thing is that the loads are so much higher now, and they need to be distributed into the hull. And that took a lot of coordination with the spar manufacturer and as well as our structural team, just to get that right, and just understand these loads really well, because there's about 24 tons of load that's sort of getting translated into the hulls.
Yeah.
And to take care of those loads are really important, and for two reasons, not just in terms of having the strength, but also making sure that it's stiff enough as well, and it's not you don't have the hulls sort of towing in or anything like that. So it was quite a unique challenge for us, but I think we pulled it off, and it seems like we're getting the results from the sea trials that we've been on so far. So
yeah, no, you can see with that martingale setup there it's solid. It's quite a feat of engineering in front there.
It is, and it is sort of what we've got there is the sort of peak of what industry allows us to sort of have, making use of the Carbolink rigging, just to make sure that it's stiff enough, strong enough to actually carry these loads. Yeah.
In terms of the tensioning of the rig, I know that this is all done on a hydraulic lift and putting those shims in there, no turnbuckles on there. That's something that's quite unique. Why is that the case on this boat?
Yeah, I think once you're going to a single cap shroud, so we don't have any lowers, as you can see, it makes it a lot easier for us to just jack the mast up. So I think that doing a strop solution is so much easier, cleaner, and utilizing a jack is always probably a better way to actually tension the rig up, as opposed to going back and forth with spanners and moving small mechanical parts. Rather do it hydraulically. So the fact that you can handle these high loads without getting your hands involved around the winch, you're able to trim in and out from just using buttons. Okay, and another benefit is that once there is a load that you've prescribed inside the PLC, that it limits it to 8 tons, and it won't see any load more than that. And what happens here is that it reduces the risk of you overloading the boat, and it would also reduce the risk of capsize as well. So if the big gust comes, the boat would slowly start to ease itself out without you actually manning or doing anything in an event like that. So I mean, there's big benefits to this, safety benefits to the hydraulics. So obviously at 38 foot wide, you need to properly see and control the extremities of the boat. So the twin helm arrangement gives a skipper proper sailing positions on either tack, and it's also particularly useful in docking, at 38 foot wide. If it's so wide, you actually need that second helm station. The visibility and everything just becomes a little bit out of key. But I think what is cool is that you're still getting that same balance position, that's just behind the saloon bulkhead. You still feel the wind in your hair, but you can still get out of the elements. You're not overly exposed, and you're not completely, disconnected from the elements by sitting, in the forward cockpit, or sometimes they have a helm in the salon area. So I think that's also quite a cool feature of the boat.
What's the functionality behind the forward cockpit?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people look at it as a nice lounging area, but in actual fact, it's a dedicated working area. So putting the reefs in the main and everything, and not being overly exposed up high on the deck, it is quite nice to have that forward cockpit solution. And obviously at 75 foot, the options were open for us to actually look at doing a dedicated forward cockpit.
You touched on this, talking about the weight of the boat, and even when you go through the yard, you can see the weights marked off on every bulkhead and every piece that's there. Just talking about the weight of this boat, 34 tons all in.
Yeah.
I mean, I know 52-foot boats that weigh that. In a boat this big, I know that a big chunk of that weight is actually just because of the interior design. Am I correct in saying that?
Correct.
So if you wanted to take this boat and push it a little bit more into the realm of like high performance racer, that's entirely possible, correct, in terms of weight?
It is correct, yeah. I think what people don't realize is that the structure is only around 45% of the overall weight.
Okay.
So you got this other 55% that is majority all interior, and the extra luxuries, and it's a game of marginal gains. I think you can definitely pull her under 30 tons. If there was a client that wanted a stripped out lightweight boat. We do know that weight is critical on boats of this size, and in cats, you need to be very cautious of the payload, because it translates to the performance of what you're going to get out of it. But yeah, I think that this one strikes a really good balance, if I could bring that into the equation.
Which is remarkable, because I mean, we got a lot of stone top, a lot of real wood flooring, even carpets and all sorts of things. It all adds, but yet still, I don't think, as you said, hasn't compromised performance on a boat like on this particular vessel. So
no, definitely not. I mean, at 34 tons, the polars are still looking really healthy. I don't think for a lot of people, they wouldn't want to be going any faster than what she's than the performance that she's already providing you. So yeah.
Can you give us a little bit more insight into naval architecture? Who's the team? How long does this take? Like, what goes into this?
We, as the Toit Yacht Design, we do a turnkey solution. So we do everything from the early hull lines through to the interior, and we also coordinate the rig package and do all the engineering work as well. But it also just starts off with the pen, getting those lines right, and proportionally you can manipulate that to scale it up to something that's proportional in size. And then obviously just understanding the use of the boat as well. I mean, that's a pretty important part of the brief. We usually get a specification as to where the client would want to go. Yeah, so typically we focus a little bit on the exterior. In between, we're looking at the specification. We do creating a bit of a weight study as well, just to see where we're going to be ending up. And in doing so, we also looking at the engineering, just the basic scantlings that would also form part of the weight study. So there's this big design spiral that goes around until we get to the stage where we pull the trigger on the hull lines, and everything, the spec is pretty firmed up. Once the hull lines are all set, that's usually when the boat would then go through to tooling, and then we can then in parallel start looking at the construction drawings and focus a little bit more on the interior detailing as well. Yeah,
because I think that's the part that gets missed, is that there's a big chunk of time is spent before anything is built.
Yes.
And then once the build starts, there's still an ongoing project right till the end. And then even once the boat hits the water, you guys are still, it's a team effort from beginning to end. Tell me a little bit more about who's on your team and who's been involved in ballast in general, and then again in this boat.
Yeah, sure. So Anton de Toy, founder, with Charmaine, they've been the principals of the Toit Yacht Design. I joined them around 8 years ago, and we have a team of interior designers, and we've also got a team of engineers that look into deck hardware, systems, as well as the structure. So it's nice having a dedicated engineering team as well. But we've also got exterior designers that actually focus on getting the aesthetics of the boat right. And we also have like sailing specialists as well. So we have an ex-Olympian sailor that is obviously heavily focused on the sailing aspect, and it's quite nice to have someone with a very keen eye that always has performance in back of their mind, and always wants to just get those marginal gains right. And so it's a good collaborative team that we've got, and we could support a project the size of what the 750 is.
On the topic of safety, I mean, safety is a big topic we've covered quite often, and we will continue to cover, because people are getting on these and crossing the ocean. So there's a lot of responsibility both on building side and on architectural side.
Yeah.
What are some of the core features, functions, and things that you have to go through to address that?
Okay, so we do a lot of work in the load cell side. So we can monitor the loads as well, just to make sure that we're sailing within the vessel's limits. And we're looking at other safety aspects like crash bow in the front. We've got raking floors in the sail locker as well. We do a lot of sort of engineering behind the daggerboard area. So if there is a risk of, there's an event of collision, that the boat remains structurally sound. If in the event that the rudder gets damaged, we put a lot of emphasis on making sure that there's redundant systems in place to ensure that the vessel doesn't get overly compromised. Yeah, and I think that we need to understand that these vessels aren't just designed to sail around the Caribbean or just in the Med. These are ocean voyaging vessels, and they could encounter anything, and they could be 1,500 miles from the nearest mainland. So just understanding that, and understanding that position that crew could find themselves in. You need to make sure that the boat is fit for purpose for ocean voyaging.
Yeah. On that note, just in the background, there's a Balance 502 over there. That's the 100th boat to launch since the first 526, just over 12 years ago now.
Yep.
What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, it's been amazing to be part of this history. I think we always knew the potential of what the Balance was, and where it would end up. But at 100 boats, and if you look back now and you said, well, we're going to be at 100 boats in X amount of time, I probably wouldn't have believed you. So I think it's just the great feedback that we've got from owners as well to improve and look at the next model, and I think that's sort of been quite key in terms of how the success of this range has become. For me, the 750 is really the pinnacle of what performance luxury sailing is. I think we've really simplified the systems, so you still get that high performance feel when you're sailing the boat, but it's not overwhelming to do the sail handling and managing. And I think that's quite a key thing, is that the simplicity of this boat on this scale, or how we simplified it with the use of technology and the systems, is a key driver to what this boat is. And I think it is going to be a head turner. I think we've really worked on the aesthetics, but we still try to keep that that balanced look and the DNA throughout. And we're just quite excited to see how the market's going to react to it. We definitely feel that a boat like this is something that the market wants, and we just need to showcase it.
Yep. We've done a walkthrough video. We're looking at some behind-the-scenes segments of what goes into the build like this. We also still need to do a sailing performance video. We need to take this boat out and show all the sails, all the points of sail, and we would love to have you aboard for that. I think it's necessary. And that's a definite reason to stay subscribed. And look out for that video. It's winter in Cape Town. We're just waiting for the right weather window to take her out again, and put all of her full kit up and give her a push.
Yeah, we look forward to be on board. Yeah.
But Sean, it's been as two people who kind of came into the company down the road and taking it on and further. It's good partnership to be with you.
Thanks, Dean.
Thank you. Congrats to us both.
Yeah.
And here's to many more.